Hello, and welcome back to my little passion project in which I look at the whiskies I have met travelling the world on cruise ships, and I try to share my joy and knowledge of that with others. I want people to see that they can sail the seven seas and see many wonders of art and culture, and yet one of the most wonderful landmarks can be in a glass just in front of them. This time, I am looking at Macallan, known as the Rolls Royce of whisky. My father-in-law gave the doctors who delivered his daughters bottles of Macallan as thank you gifts. I used Macallan to toast him at his funeral. My wife favours the Macallan as a whisky to invest in, either to be sold later or to be given as gifts to our 10 grandchildren in the future. The 2003 edition of Collecting Malt Whisky, the definitive guide to malt whiskies at auction, dedicates 8 pages to Macallan and starts it by saying the Macallan over all the single malts has held the world record auction price for the longest, over a 16-year period, currently £18,000. The huge range of bottlings is the largest seen at auction. It is the only whisky that gets named in the introduction. It also gets 2 mentions in the book Whisky Kitchen for a chocolate lattice and for a linguine with Stratton and walnut sauce, emphasising how well a Macallan can be paired with both chocolate and with cheese. In Ian Buxton's book, 101 Whiskies to Try Before You Die, he lists 101 whiskies from around the world that he feels the whisky enthusiast should seek out to complete their education. Out of the 101, 3 of them are Macallan. When it comes to Scotch, ships seem to focus tasting classes on either Johnny Walker, see my previous episode, or Macallan. Which begs the question, if I can learn about Macallan on the ship, why bother listening to this? Well, there's a lot more to Macallan than you will get in the tasting events. Plus, you can watch this many times when you want, and it is free. I'm not saying don't bother with the tastings, especially if you get a good offer. The tasting sessions on board will allow you to taste expressions that you might not usually taste. It will give you a chance to talk about them and to learn more about each one and the differences between them. Let's start at the beginning and maybe shake the tree of legends a bit to see how firm its roots are. Glenlivet began its story with a bang, literally. Its origins included a strong character defending himself at gunpoint, pushing forward to defend its name and reputation, passing it on to the next generation. It is a tale that is legendary, but it's not the only one by far. The Excise Act of 1823 was not a simple bit of legislation that enabled people to just buy a licence and open a distillery. The Act laid down specific requirements on how that was to be done. This required time to adapt and build. This is one of the reasons that the Act passed in 1823, yet the first licences didn't come out until 1824. Glenlivet was the first and got its licence on I think 9th of November, but let that sink in. With all the status of being the first and with others also getting the licences on the same year, the Glenlivet could only have been ahead by the others by about a month. Considering the time it took to meet the standards of the Act, other distilleries must have already been deep into the process and most likely would have been distilling without the licence before that. Macallan also got the licence in 1824. The founder was Alexander Reed, a former school teacher who had turned into growing barley on an 8-acre area of land on the Earl of Seafield's estate known as Easter Elkis. Whilst close in proximity, this is not to be confused with Wester Elkis mentioned in the episode about Glenlivet. Just to add to any confusion, The whisky Reed made wasn't called Macallan at that point, but was under the name of the Alkis Distillery, which, according to some, may have made whisky known by the village's name of Craigellachie, not to be confused with the current distillery of the same name that was founded in 1890 and has connections with Dewars, which was the focus of episode 1.
The internet is a wonderful resource, but you do have to fact check things as it is quite often misleading. Some say that Alexander Reed passed the distillery on to his son, also called Alexander Reed. However, Alexander Reed died in 1847 and his son, also called Alexander, died only a year later, while still in his 20s. It was two partners who carried the business on. These were the two Jameses, Davidson and Priest, and it was them who signed an agreement with James Stewart, who eventually took over the distillery, saw it through some very difficult times and managed a significant rebuild. There's going to be more about the current building later.
In 1892, the distillery is taken over by Roderick Kemp. Kemp is a key figure in the distillery's history. His family owned and controlled it for many years, and he set some key foundations, such as the use of sherry wood management. A strong leader, Kemp also renamed it as Macallan Glenlivet after the area, a name that stayed until 1980. But hard as it might be to imagine now, Macallan was not a well-known household name. The whisky being produced was mainly being used for blending, and in this role it was seen as being one of the best. Numerous sources mention Macallan as being sought after by blenders who would use it as a top dressing, something that would raise the blend to a higher level. Within the series I am doing, I have already mentioned blends like Cutty Sark and Famous Grouse, both of which contain Macallan, but they're not alone. Richard Patterson named Macallan as one of his great chieftains, being elegant and sophisticated, bold and majestic, and when combined with their counterparts, they radiate like a beacon in a dark sea. But, as we know, the world of whisky has ups and downs. The problems of prohibition and world wars hit Macallan as it did others. So did changes in trends. Blended whisky had been influential and positive in establishing whisky as a global success, and Macallan has long been a favoured part of that market. However, the love of the blend was to begin to wane. People began to want something more. As people began to learn about whisky, they wanted to feed their interests and develop a sense of having something special. I remember the actor Gordon Jackson in the role of George Cowley, head of CI5 in the UK TV series The Professionals. This was back in 1977, and in one scene he scolded a colleague with the words, "Good God, man, that's a single malt." It was the first time I remember hearing the term, and it stuck with me that a single malt must be something special, and it is. The age of the single malt was rising, and Macallan was prepared for it. Back in 1943, managing partner Dr. Samuel Shiak began a policy of only selling its product to cover expenses. The rest of the production was to be laid down for maturation. This foresight was significant, and in March 1980, the distillery launched its first advert as a single malt in an edition of the Times newspaper, and it later celebrated it as Folio 1 in their archival series of select bottlings. As Macallan emerged with its own identity, one cannot underestimate how strong its impact was. In the book Whisky and Philosophy, Heigel's ideals are considered in terms of the concept of an ideal whisky. The idea being that an ideal will be something that is true and complete to the concept of what it should be. and how that can be applied to the concept of Scotch. This doesn't mean that it is the best in every sense. If you prefer a strong peaty whisky, then it may not be your favourite. But the strong peaty whisky is also not meeting the complete concept of whisky. It would have a leaning to one side of the concept. An ideal whisky, by such definition, would need to contain the full range of complexity whilst also obtaining a balance across all components. This would be an incredible achievement of skill, and the one they used to illustrate it was Macallan. But I want to take this further. The book mentions these ideals in relation to the whisky itself, but I have argued many times that whisky is more than a drink. It has much more to it. The ideal whisky has artistry and craft in many forms. One needs to look at its own philosophy regarding things like sustainability, aspects of marketing, presentation, and much more. The ideal could also be applied to the people who make it. Macallan does this in many ways, including the role of women within the world of whisky. Not only am I grateful for what women have given to the whisky world, but I acknowledge that they have always been there as an essential part of it. This is something that the image of whisky within society has falsely represented. For far too long, women were restricted to limited roles and rarely seen as whisky drinkers. Yet women were involved from the very beginning. If you look back at my previous episodes, you will see mention of women such as Grace Gow in the Glenturret episode and Dewar's Stephanie MacLeod. Macallan is no exception. Roderick Kemp's leadership was followed by a trust in his name. In 1918, his daughter Janet Harbinson,
known as Nettie, took on the role of managing partner, and in 1926 laid down a cask number 263, that was bottled in 1986 and broke records when a single bottle sold at auction in 2018 for £1.2 million. In 2019, another bottle of the 1926 single malt sold, this time for £1.5 million, but it didn't stop there. In 2023, yet another bottle of the 1926 sold at auction, this time for £2,187,500.
They released a short film in her honour called The Spirit of 1926. This raises another aspect of being an ideal whisky, inasmuch as what range of customers it can attract. After all, we can't all afford to pay £1.2 million for a bottle. The answer is that Macallan has a very wide appeal. Remember, it's popular in blends, so there will be many who unknowingly appreciate it. As a single malt, its range of expressions and price points are extensive, making them very interesting to collectors. The core base range has various age statements and a choice of purely sherry oaked expressions or fine oak ones that add in the American oak influence. The number of special releases are incredible and often link around themes and world famous artists of various disciplines. The £1.2 million 1926 bottle was not just a bottle, it was hand painted by Ireland's Michael Dillon and featured Easter Elker's house, home of the distillery. Macallan is well known for its collaborations with others, each set being works of art in many ways and far too many for me to list here, but well worth looking into. As a quick digression, it is said that impersonation is the highest form of flattery. There is a single malt formed by two separate distilleries. How can this be possible? By making it within the world of fiction. Created by prop company Independent Studio Services, the single malt from Dipton in Rossshire, don't try to find it on a map, has featured in many films and TV shows such as Shield, Bones, Grey's Anatomy, The American Office, Burn Notice, Sons of Anarchy, Castle, Community, Modern Family, Pretty Little Liars, Breakout Kings, Agents of Shield, Banshee, Chicago PD, The Player, Zoo, and Mr. Mercedes. The whiskey in question is Macallan. It comes in a number of fictional age statements and is formed by a combination of the names of Glenlivet and Macallan. Macallan itself is no stranger to the world of film, playing a significant role within a famous franchise. This is a good example of one of the collaboration sets that I mentioned earlier. If Macallan was a person, what sort of person would that be? Someone with a sense of style, lots of charisma, someone who is strong and bold, yet comfortable in all situations, a person that somehow spans generations, managing to be traditional and yet modern, classic and yet cutting edge, someone who is familiar, reassuring, and yet has a sense of danger, something of the maverick. Macallan has a special relationship with James Bond. Their Bond collection has a representation for all 6 decades of the official franchise, each with those extras such as included artwork. The link with Bond is a real one, and one of the rare moments when a whiskey can come out of one type of Bond and go straight into a different type of Bond. Macallan can be seen within the films themselves, as it has become Bond's preferred whiskey. Keen observers may even notice little Easter eggs within the films. For example, there is a scene in the film Skyfall in which Bond is set the task of shooting a dram of whiskey that is balanced on Severin's head. It does not go well for her, and his remark is that the exercise was a waste of good scotch. The scotch in question is of course a Macallan, but to be precise, it is a 50-year-old fine and rare Macallan, and the film was made during Bond's 50th anniversary. And it was a 1962 vintage, with 1962 being the year the first official Bond film was released. It's not the only fine detail within the franchise. Another example is the Diamonds Are Forever 55th anniversary release, using whiskey distilled in the year 2007, or 2007. Another significant collection is the 6 Pillars collection. 6 whiskies aged 50, 55, 57, 60, 62 and 65 years each with their own purpose-designed elite crystal decanter. But what are these 6 pillars? I first came across these in a small booklet written by Charles MacLean called The Macallan Pillars of Spiritual Wisdom, written in 1998. Approaching 30 years later, and the Macallan website still has the 6 pillars, although they are now updated. The 6 pillars lay down the distillery's core belief, its principles and ethos. So, with so much more to say than I could possibly have time to, I'm going to finish by quickly looking at these 6 pillars. Number 1, in 1998, this was uncompromising selection and related to the insistence of using the barley strain Golden Promise, even when other strains gave higher yields. This is no longer the case. A harsh reality of life is that low-yielding strains cannot meet high and rising demands, plus there is immense risk in being restricted to a single variety. Distilleries are forced to review their choice of barley as disease develops and strains suffer, requiring a constant process of development. The modern version of the first pillar has now moved to be mastery, an unwavering commitment to craftsmanship and excellence. Number 2. Previously, this was singularly complex fermentation and related to the specific cocktail of yeast strains designed and tested to be best for what they wanted. The modern version is exceptional oak casks, and I'm going to come back to that one later. Number 3. The order of the 6 pillars have changed, but the former number 3 is still there, but in a different position. It is curiously small stills. It's an odd one, and something that frequently comes up at tasting events. The fine taste profile could suggest a tall still, and yet Macallan's utilises a traditionally small still with a descending line arm and no reflux bowl. The size enables a higher ratio of liquid to copper contact. The broad head of the still results in less force in upward flow. Rising vapours in a tall and thin still has a chimney effect that can rush the vapours through, whilst a shorter, broader still can disperse this energy outwards and retain the vapours for longer, increasing the time in contact with the copper. The descending angle of the line arm means that once the vapours have crossed over, they can get to the condensers quickly. The result is a distillate that has had the cleaning effect of the copper contact without losing much of the flavour profile. This leads us to the next stage, number 4, a preciously fine cut. The new pillar relates to its natural colour, but I'll come back to that later. Macallan is known to only use a small, best pick of the distillate to take forward to the next stage. Number 5, originally this was exclusively sherry casks. This is a key part of its identity, but it's not as simple as it first sounds. The modern version to this is sherry seasoned. Now, there would have been a time when Macallan would have only used sherry casks, which would have been made from European oak. As time has gone by, this has changed. They've been able to expand the scope of their expressions by the use of American oak, a difference in tree type from which the wood is sourced. And it is worth mentioning that Macallan were amongst the first distilleries to be actively involved in this, right down to the selection of trees and which part of the tree to be used in making the casks. They now use 3 types of casks. Casks made from American oak that have been seasoned with sherry, casks made from European oak which have been seasoned with sherry, and ex-bourbon casks. Number 6. This is where naturally fine colour originally sat. Macallan do not add caramel for colour, but are also aware that the impact of colour is part of the experience, which they achieve through using natural and skillful means. In the modern version, Pillar 6 is the grounds themselves. It's Esther Elkis' house, the history, the spiritual home. But it's more than that. The distillery itself is a work of art. It has changed dramatically over the decades and can be a shock for those who don't know. Pause this, close your eyes and ask how you imagine that distillery to look like. Where does your imagination take you? Is it a traditional distillery of stone, a pagoda roof, venting peated smoke? Or, considering the amount in volume that it makes, is it more like an industrial unit with large metal tanks and miles of venting pipes? Opened in 2018, taking around 400 workers to build it at a cost of £140 million. It has a total of 36 stills and much more. It is modern, natural, sensitive, sustainable, beautiful, subtle, and just wonderful.